Welcome. I'm Tilly Strauss, painter, historian living in Northeast Dutchess County, New York, and I'm glad to be back with this Who Is She series, which follows up on last year's series that we had. I'm here with January Cho, who's going to be like my compatriot here with adding in any insight or additional thoughts as we move through this. We're going to be virtually breaking bread to acknowledge some lady legacies. And I've tried to visualize what type of celebration would be most appropriate to honor them. This is a way for us to bond and find strength in the female collective. It's International Women's Day today as well. And we definitely stand on the shoulders of our ancestors. Each of these women contributed way more and lived much richer lives than I can possibly share in a morning. So I'm going to emphasize how they inspired and where you can go to experience their art story yourself. Change the slide. Thank you. So let's have a party. I want to extend some birthday wishes for the Inspiration Art Group, birthdays from the people who have birthdays in March and April and May, like Leonie Castellino and Leslie Polino, my dad, Julian Strauss, Alan Cohen, Tanya Kukuka, Frank Matthias, Elizabeth McDonald, Susie Surik, and my good friend Kim Capillaro. So, yes. So I want to share, before we go further, I want to share this timeline that kind of give us some context, because these women lived very long lives and they lived through political upheaval. They faced sexist and racist barriers. And the story moves across some shifting centers of the art world. We're going to start in New York. We'll end up in Paris, and then also on these outskirts like Louisiana and Long Island and Framingham, Massachusetts, and Philadelphia. So as you can see on the chart, Medavo Warwick and Matilda Gettings Gray lived approximately the same time span. Warwick was up in the northern US, and Gray was down in the south. So it's kind of interesting. And both their lives overlap with the three other women. So, okay, so Elaine de Kooning, she's born on March 12th. She was born in Brooklyn, and she spent her childhood studying art and visiting museums, and she definitely got swept up in the cultural excitement of New York in the late 1930s and through the 1940s. She was a fierce force of the abstract expressionist movement, and she was known to be the center of attention at the Cedar Tavern, which was the epicenter of these artists living in Lower Manhattan. She was a heavy drinker and smoker, and she loved to talk with her friends about art theory for hours. But basically, Elaine is responsible for redefining what you can do with abstraction and portraiture. She supported herself with many different jobs, diverse income streams. She was an art critic and worked for Art News, and she taught at many universities and colleges. In 1946, she was introduced to Willem de Kooning. She called him Bill, and the two became a power couple on the scene. She was convinced of his genius and promoted his career. They had an open marriage, which was a bit tumultuous, possibly passive aggressive, and though they never divorced, they didn't live together very long. She was with him at the end when he developed dementia, but she did die before him. His career overshadowed hers. But she was more than just his wife. She was an amazing, brilliant artist, a thoughtful critic, and a teacher in her own right. In 1957, they separated. That was the year that Willem fathered a child with another woman, and she had spent the summer with his gallery dealer on a yacht somewhere. She went to the University of Mexico in Albuquerque and got her first car, because she's been a city girl. And this was a tremendous sense of freedom for her. And it was a time women were able to drive and do all sorts of, traveling. She went to the University of California in Davies and taught there. She taught at the Carnegie Mellon, even at Southampton College on Long Island, the Cooper Union and Pratt in New York City. She taught at Yale. She taught at RISD. She taught at the University of Georgia and even the New York Studio School in Paris. She loved to teach, and her students loved her. As you can see from this quote of hers, she was really like an action painter. Her painting, you can see her in the studio there, she would paint larger than life. And it was all like she would create this nest of gestural brushstrokes. And out of it, slowly, the figure would sort of emerge. And she tried to capture, it's all with movement and energy. And she reversed the trope on men in art history painting women. She took on just painting men. And she started with a group of athletes, basketball stars. And then, these are her friends, fellow artists and art critics. And she said she loved how a suit, just depicting a suit, could tell a story. This is her most famous portrait commission was for the president, John F. Kennedy. And she went to Palm Beach and set up her easel in did hundreds of sketches and paintings. He didn't actually pose for her. She had to capture him while he was doing business and acts of diplomacy and having meetings and stuff. In the time period that she was working on this, he was assassinated, and she took it pretty hard. She said one thing she said about him was that he glowed, that there seemed to be this aura around him, a golden aura. After that, after the assassination, she took a pause in her painting career, and she returned to East Hampton, Long Island, where she had a house, and just waited for a while till digesting and still working on some of the pieces. But later in life, she returned to painting. She traveled to Europe, and she was inspired by some of the fountains and statues in the public parks. And she created plein air studies. And then back in her studio, she would rework these pieces. She also got inspired by the ancient, prehistoric cave art. She said, and like we're doing, we're standing on her shoulders as a forerunner in the art world. She reveled in the abstraction of our ancestors as well, and that the way they would do stuff. Now, her house in East Hampton is an art residency now, and it's a place you can go and see and maybe read some of her letters and her papers. And her works, there's a list of where you can see her work today in some museums. January, do you know much about her, or have you had any interaction with her work?
I've seen her work before, but I think I'm so glad to join, not knowing what this program is going to be like. I'm just stunned to learn about her dynamic spectrum of the life, and then also all these looking at her work in the studio really is inspiring. Just looking at the portrait of Kennedy, look at the size of it. That's really amazing. And yeah, I was.
I love finding studio pictures. I wish we could come up with a book of.
You know, if that studio is the same studio as in East Hampton that you
I
just
think
mentioned?
so. I think so. I'm not sure about this one, but actually, I think my slide is wrong. It's the next slide back. It says Southampton, and I think it meant to say East Hampton. I think this is her studio. Which you can see the skylights in the back over her head corner. Yeah, I would love to see more of her work, and I think she was pretty amazing. And I love the whole idea too of suits, you know?
Right. And
Like
then I didn't know that she painted a lot of portraits.
yeah,
Portraits. I thought
that's
she was in abstract art, but not necessarily a figurative portraits. So
yeah, yeah, it's kind of it's interesting. I don't yeah. So, well, let me go on to the next one. Let's see. I'm going to talk about Medavo Warwick Fuller. Fuller was her married name, so sometimes I refer to her as Medavo Warwick. Um, she was a groundbreaking African American sculptor born on March 12th. And oh, no, actually, she died on March 12th. Elaine de Kooning was born on March 12th. Medavo died on March 12th. But I thought that she should be recognized as well. She used her sculptures to tell stories of resilience and infuse pride in the Black American narrative. So when I picture her celebration of sorts, I kind of thought that she wasn't really celebrated enough in her life, except when she would reveal or unveil a public sculpture. So I kind of created this scene where she's sharing a sculpture as sort of her birthday celebration. Um, she channeled, as a teenager, she really loved horror stories and melodramatic ghost stories. And so she channeled her love of that kind of horror into her work. And her first notorious sculpture was a crucifixion of Christ, which won her a scholarship to Paris. And she was 21 years old when she took a boat across the Atlantic by herself to London and then across the Channel and down to Paris. And she experienced an awkward, well, that's a nice way to put it, instance of racism upon her arrival. She had made reservation at the American Women's Club of Paris, and they were shocked. The director was eager to greet her until she raised her veil over her hat and saw that she was Black. And she was furious that she hadn't disclosed that information earlier. And there were several women, American women, who refused to eat at the same table as her. So she had to be turned away. So, luckily, Henry Osawa Tanner, an American painter, much older than her, who was living in Paris, came to her rescue and helped her find lodging, and he introduced her to society. She registered for courses at the Académie Colarossi, and she took some courses at the École des Beaux-Arts, and she was even mentored by Auguste Rodin, who encouraged her to embrace expressive forms. Now, Paris at the turn of the century, she's there in 1899, and in 1900 is the World Expo. And actually, the first Olympics are held there that women are allowed to compete in. And this is just a trivia thing, but the metro system underneath Paris opened that year. So you could go underground and come up in a whole different section of town without hardly any effort, you know? Very exciting. And above all of this, the Eiffel Tower was painted gold and yellow. She was called by the press the sculptor of horrors and included in the 1903 Salon de Beaux-Arts. She said she sculpted the soul rather than the figure. And this sculpture on the side here is called Secret Sorrow or Man Eating His Heart. It was a favorite of Rodin's. And it was in the 1900 Salon. And just as a side note, a work of hers called The Wretched was exhibited at the same lodging which she had been turned away from and won an award right before she came back to the United States. Now, while in Paris, she met W.E.B. Du Bois, and he started guiding her towards the new Negro movement, which was a movement advocating injecting dignity into the story and during a time of very discriminatory Jim Crow laws. And she was told by him and more than by others that the blackness of her skin had to be more obvious in the product of her hands. When she returned to Philadelphia in 1903, she tried to defy this pigeonholing as a Black artist. She just wanted to do her her own thing. But she quickly learned that if she wanted to have any future as an artist in America, any commissions, she would have to create race-based work. And in 1907, she won the first federal commission, the United States commission given to a Black artist. And it was for the series, these dioramas with hundreds of figures in them that were exhibited in Jamestown for the tercentennial. She started just creating work that addressed themes like anti-lynching and the tortured Black American. And that's when W.E.B. Du Bois had to step in again. And he commissioned this piece, one of her most famous, Ethiopia Awakening. And it's a Black woman emerging from her wrappings, symbolizing a cultural awakening of sorts. And there's a quote there from Mida about the Egyptians and the dignity of them. So with Fuller's role in shaping this Black cultural identity and under the mentorship of Du Bois, she actually became and is known as memorializing resilience as the mother of the Harlem Renaissance. So, in 1909, she, after a very long courtship, she married, and he was the first Black psychiatrist in America. And they moved to Framingham, Massachusetts, where she had 3 children. And then it turned out he didn't want her to be an artist anymore. He wanted her to be a mother and a wife, and threw down a lot of barriers to that. Also, that was 1909. In 1910, her warehouse full of 16 years of her work in Philadelphia burned to the ground. So she lost her work, and she lost her ability and time to make art. And it must have been a very hard time for her. But what she did was she created this small studio up in the attic of her house where she conceived of stage sets and innovative theater lighting techniques. And she actually wrote plays under a pseudonym that she sold to theater companies in Boston. With that money, she eventually was able to rent a building down the street in secret. Her husband never knew, where she had students and taught lessons in sculpture. Now, her husband dies in 1953. She kept creating the works. Her last work addressed the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Alabama. But I'm just so impressed at her determination and resilience. She created art for over 60 years. And she died on this March 12th in the spring of 1968. Now, if you want to see her work today, the biggest collection of her work and her papers is at the Danforth Museum in Framingham. And they have actually recreated her studio, her attic studio is there, like the eaves, everything. So that's where to go for that. I think January, doesn't that seem like a tour maybe we need to go
Yes.
to? Yeah.
That sounds amazing. Also, I can relate to her struggles going through identity as a woman and as a minority. I always have this expectation of other people. If I talk about identity in my work, they automatically expect to see certain cultural identity or ethnic identity. So that's really interesting how she was exploring different way of expressing her art and the theme. And then also I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned that she was renting the studio and then she kept it secret from her husband. Do you know why?
Because he was totally, he did not allow her to be an artist. He was totally against her being an artist. Yeah, she had to, he discouraged anything of her past doing that. And she couldn't.
Wow.
No, I came across her too. I guess it had to be, she had a house on the bluffs in Martha's Vineyard, and she was a neighbor of Lois Malu Jones, who's much younger than her, and became a mentor of her too, and helped Lois Malu figure out like being pigeonholed as a Black artist and what, what you were expected, and really how you could make a living too. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know, as an artist. But this was the first time I really learned about her too. So
Mhm.
I've got, I'm really looking forward to.
Yeah, it's remarkable that she uh, even though she had to keep it as a secret, she was keep pursuing her creativity.
Yeah, and making money with students and or selling plays. I mean, I'd be very curious to find out more about the plays as well, you know? So so let's go to the next artist, unless you have anything else. This 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 woman, Matilda Gettings Gray, was born March 18th, 1885. She was one of three children and the only daughter of this wealthy oil man in Louisiana. And at one point, the Gray Ranch, the oil fields, were the most productive in the world. She studied to be an artist at the Newcomb College School of Art, but ended up channeling her love of beauty into collecting and preserving treasures of time. And she amassed one of the most important collections of Fabergé eggs outside of Russia. So she was unmarried when her father died in 1921, and it was Matilda, not her brothers, who took over the reins of the timber and the oil business. And she actually turned out to be a very astute businesswoman. Her interests were wide ranging, from Guatemalan Indian fabrics and French bookbinding to studying with a Greek sculptor. She had a passion for restoration of old buildings and actually restored Evergreen Plantation. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's the most intact plantation complex in the South, with 37 buildings and 22 slave cabins. It's where Django Unchained, that movie, was filmed. She also restored several buildings in the New Orleans French Quarter. Matilda was very fond of travel, and it was at the 1933 Chicago World's Fair where she first came across the work of Peter Carl Fabergé, and she became determined at that point to assemble a collection of his objects, his decorative objects. And this was long before the, his notoriety had even come to this country. He was a visionary, a Russian visionary jeweler, and virtually unknown outside of Russia. Um, okay, so not only was he an artisan jeweler, but he was a visionary. In 1872, he took over his father's small little atelier in St. Petersburg, and within 40 years, he transformed it into the world's largest enterprise of its kind, with over 500 craftsmen and designers. Now, Matilda's collection includes 57 rare pieces, with 3 Russian imperial Easter eggs and a number of other important functional items, fantasy items, floral items. Now, before Matilda Gettings Gray died, she established a foundation, and they give grants to local universities to promote art shows and the study of art, and also she gives to agricultural education. But there was a stipulation in her will upon her death that the broad public should be able to enjoy her collection. So it was going to travel around the country. Now, before we change slides, I want you to look closely at these things. These eggs actually have movable parts, and inside come out these little screens with individual paintings on them of regiments. The one on the lower right is all little army regiments. The one on in the middle is landscapes, different palaces. Anyway, so for 8 years, these 3 eggs plus the 56 other pieces, 4 pieces, traveled the country. And then in 1980, at the Payne Art Center in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where it had just been installed and was going to be there for 3 months, there was a burglary. And the burglars were able to get in and take the 3 eggs. And they soon probably found out that you couldn't sell them. So they asked for ransom. So in January the following year, the director of the Payne Museum was able to confirm that the eggs, those were the real eggs, and they were not damaged. And so they left $250,000 at a specific drop point, which of course the FBI had staked out, and it like a massive car chase across several state lines happened before the two guys were arrested and the ransom was retrieved. But notably after that, the Gettings Gray Foundation was a little nervous about the work going out again. I don't think they had the insurance to cover something like that. So the New Orleans Museum of Art stepped up and said that they would create a special room. And in 1988, they did. The collection was installed in the museum. And then 2005, Hurricane Katrina came barreling towards Louisiana, New Orleans in particular. So the collection was moved to the Cheekwood Botanical Garden and Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, where the connection I could see was that Matilda had a nephew who was an art collector up there who lived in Nashville. Well, now they're on long-term loan to the museum, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in the city, where I ran across them in this sort of hallway next to the elevator on my way to the cafe on the ground floor. So change the slide and I'll show you. I was stunned by this lily basket. That's what I saw. It's like 7.5 inches wide. It's exquisite. And so it's regarded as Fabergé's best floral piece, and his best piece probably after the imperial eggs. It was made as a gift for Empress Alexandra Fedorovna, who was Catherine the Great's daughter-in-law. And it was the lily of the valley was her favorite flower, and she loved this piece, and she kept this on her desk in her study until the Revolution. Now, there's 9 individual plants here that have gold stems, and each one bears a pearl blossom that's edged in silver and set with rose-cut diamonds. The stems, the silver is all like oxidizing black now, but to clean it would probably damage the pearls, so it's not. But so it's on that moss is like a web of spun gold, and the leaves are like this stone, this shaved stone that's put together. It's just beautiful. Now, Matilda, she preferred to do her philanthropic deeds out of the limelight, under the radar. But one of the things that she did do was an incredible international act of generosity. Was after World War II, France and England were suffering major food shortages, and she shipped over 250,000 pounds of rice to those countries. Now, England has awarded her with the Order of the British Empire. In France, she got the Legion of Honor. And for other incredible deeds that we won't go into right now, Guatemala gave her the Order of the Quetzal. So she was an amazing decorator. So, January, any thoughts? I don't know.
Wow, that's that's an adventure of the eggs.
Yeah.
And, I have a question about the lily basket. Is it still at the Met, or was it part of the traveling?
Yes, it's there. It's there on temporary long-term loan, and it's just in the hallway. And yeah, it's there's that great hall of sculptures down by where you go to the cafe. It's just around the corner from it. And I just ran across her, and that picture of her is what I took off of the sign that is there explaining a little bit. And I was like, who is she? I got to find out more. So that was just my newest find. I love learning about these women who have preserved and saved art, and put it out there for the rest of us to see.
Yeah, I will definitely go look for it next time when I go to the Met.
Yes, please do. So the next artist is also really well decorated, and I drew one of her ribbons down on the grass next to what I picture her cake, which is a wild horse atop a nature-inspired confection. And it's in front of this chateau in the Fontainebleau forest, which is southwest of Paris City. It's now a private museum for Rosa, and a high-end bed and breakfast and a tea room. So you can actually go there and sleep in Rosa Bonheur's bed. By the time Rosa was 37, oh, her birthday, by the way, is March 16th. She was independently wealthy, and she had commissions and ribbons and awards. But what I was most inspired by her story is that she lived in an era of tremendous political upheaval and government turnover. There were revolutions, invasions, war. She was born like right after Napoleon was defeated and Louis XVIII, the Bourbon king, took the throne. At age 26, she lived through a second government overthrow at the revolution of 1848. And at age 48, she's going to live through the invasion of Paris with the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. And all the while, she maintains her painting practice with a singular passion. Now, she was orphaned and adopted by a wealthy merchant when she was 4 or 5 years old. And it turns out on his deathbed, he actually revealed to her that he was her father. He was a painter and an art teacher, and he aspired to be recognized. So he moved his whole family up from the south of France to Paris because he wanted to get into the salon. And we mentioned the salon with Mida Warwick Fuller, but the salon, I should just tell you, if you don't know, it was an annual exhibition held in Paris that was controlled by the academics and the government. And if you wanted to have a career in the arts, you had to get in the salon. And God forbid, they stamped the back of your piece with a giant R for refuse. It was the only way you could get commissions and everything. So he went up there trying to get in the salon. He taught art and music to children. At age 14, Rosa announced that she was going to be an artist. And her best friend, who was 12, Natalie Micas, would become her assistant and lifelong partner. Natalie and her mother would also live in this chateau with Rosa and handle all the details of Rosa's life. So this is a sort of a collage of a sampling of some of her pieces. At the age of 18, Rosa's accepted into the salon, and she gets a third prize, which is pretty amazing for a woman and a youngster at that. And at the age of 26, which is during the revolution of 1848, where the king abdicates, flees the country, she gets into the salon again. This is the second time. And this time she gets first prize. And her work is bought by the new French government and placed in the palace. And from then on, she is financially independent. La Bourrage Nivernais, which is the oxen plowing, which is an upper left thing, is now at the Musée d'Orsay. And it's a good example of her sophisticated polish. It's a giant piece, very realistic, and a lot of emphasis on the musculature and these sort of dynamic compositions. Her work was universally applauded, and she was told, and I don't know how often this has ever happened, that she no longer had to submit to the jury. The salon every year would take whatever she would give them. And some years she didn't give them anything because she was so busy with commissions. Oh, the press would despair. She doesn't love us anymore and everything. So she had no worries about money, and she was able to continue her career just painting. But she also had this mission to help other women become artists, and she became a director of the Free Imperial School of Drawing for Young Women, which I think is pretty cool. Okay. Her specialty, if you haven't caught it by now, is painting animals, and she does large canvases and small studies. And she was seen as celebrating the rural life of France and, by extension, the grandeur of French cuisine. She was just celebrated by all her French compatriots. She surrounded herself in animals. She would often go and work in nature, and she actually had a menagerie at that chateau. She had a lion that wandered around. She had ducks, goats, dogs, pigs, everything. Now, this painting, The Horse Fair, is from 1853, is her most famous painting, and in my book, I think. And anyway, it's 8 feet tall by 16 feet long, and after it was shown, it went on tour, which I'm trying to fathom how in the 1850s they possibly moved a painting like this, and not only around the country, but it went across the channel to England, where Queen Victoria wanted a private viewing. Empress Eugenie was up there. She was Napoleon III's wife who had abdicated. And Empress Eugenie actually came and saw it too. Cornelius Vanderbilt, one of America's wealthiest men, bought the piece and brought it to the Metropolitan Museum, where you can see it today. Now, Rosa was an extremely brave woman. She wore men's clothing to go into the slaughterhouses to study the musculature and the bone structure of animals. And I mean, this painting here alone has so many different views of horses. You know that she studied from life and just understood how these animals were put together. The law at the time did not allow women to wear pants, and she had to actually carry a specific paper to authorize her to wear pants. And the rumor has it that when Empress Eugenie came to see the painting, she was actually very disappointed that Rosa had worn a dress, because she was just as famous for wearing pants as she was for her paintings. So this is if we're frustrated by fashion, like sometimes I'm totally frustrated by having jeans that have pockets sewn shut, I mean, she really dealt with the frustration of fashion. And on the left is her permission slip to wear pants. And she was one of only 12 women in Paris with this privilege. And that's a photograph of her there on the bench. And there, at this time too, there was pushback against this. There was the Rational Dress Society that was protesting any fashion that deforms the figure, like bustles and corsets and high-heeled boots. And there was also Amelia Bloomer, who had designed these trousers that could be tied at the ankles. And basically, these groups, the biggest most successful innovations they were able to come up with were with underwear. And eventually the corset will be loosened, and the underwear was easy to change because it wasn't subject to ridicule in the streets, But by the best motivator of the change of fashions was the bicycle. By 1890, which is the last decade of Rosa's life, bicycles are everywhere, and women are able to wear these sort of bloomer trousers. Now I have a picture in the lower right of this Rosa Bonheur doll, which at the second half of the 19th century in America was the most popular doll. Everybody had one who could get one, and it's a woman with pants. Now, Rosa never married, but late in life, after Natalie died, an American, Anna Klumpke, who was raised much like 35 years younger than Rosa, who was raised with this doll in America, came to France looking for Rosa. She wanted to paint her portrait, and the two developed a fast friendship. She moved into the chateau and took care of Rosa and handled her legacy after her death. Anna Klumpke, Natalie Micas, and Rosa Bonheur are all buried in the same tomb at Père Lachaise now in France. Isn't that pretty awesome?
Oh, I didn't realize that you had to have a permission to be able to dress in pants. That's remarkable.
And actually, the one time she was arrested, this is a strange little fact. She was arrested once by a policeman because they thought she was a man in dress. So the one time she was arrested on the streets for fashion was because she was wearing a dress.
Wow.
Isn't that crazy? Oh. Well,
she definitely was a pioneer in her time.
And successful, which is good. So the next artist is one of the most famous living artists today. And on March 22nd, she's going to turn 96. She was born in 1929 in Matsumoto, Japan. And she's famous for her polka dots. So I kind of created this cake, I figured, with confetti and a background that might like have the work sort of blend into it, because she's also known for her infinity rooms and her immersive installations. Her work is about endless expansion, self obliteration, and transformation, which are powerful metaphors for the artistic persistence. She has a tumultuous history. She hit heights of popularity and then disappeared, and then heights again. She had a childhood marked with mental health challenges, including hallucinations and obsessive thoughts. And she actually began creating art as a means to cope with her experience and express her inner world. In the 1950s, she came to New York City, and she was embraced and involved with the avant-garde. She was good friends with Andy Warhol and Klaus Oldenburg, and she did a lot of performances. Here's a couple scenes from it, mostly using video and photography to capture them in history. Then she went back to Japan full of glory, and was met with total disapproval from her family. And it was very shocking. And she faced increasing struggles with her mental health. Now, she's openly discussed her childhood, which was marked by trauma and feelings of isolation. She had a very critical relationship with her mother, who was very cold to her, she says, and it was very strained in the family. But these hallucinations she had became very overwhelming, and they're also influential. She's using them in her art to inform her vision and everything. So let's change the slide. One more here. It's like, I think her battle with mental illness might have delayed and played in sort of her going in and out of notoriety. In 1977, she voluntarily admitted herself, I should say, to a mental hospital where she lives to this day. And she says that it helps her. It provides a sort of a stable environment for her to focus on her art. Her art is definitely a therapeutic outlet for her and explores the inner world. But it's been embraced by designers, and it's been utilized on merchandise. Like, you might have seen those gourds that are painted. There's sort of pumpkin gourds that are painted with dots, and there's flower pots painted with dots, and there's actually robots with her red hair in store windows that helped show things. So she really tapped into the appeal of consumers of our generation, I guess, too. So this slide, and this is my last slide really, is one of her infinity rooms. These are immersive installations that you go in, and it's like everything sort of dissolving boundaries, and you can lose yourself in the experience. It's created with mirrors and lights and dots and all sorts of tricks she puts in there. But what I'm amazed about is how her long continuing life, teaches us new ways of seeing, from performance to painting to design to developing merch to now these experiential, immersive rooms that kind of give you a collective perspective. It's really a phenomena, and I think that everybody who can should try to get to one of these infinity rooms. 12 locations, I can tell you. There's one at the Tate Modern in London. There's one in Hong Kong and in Denmark and Bergamo, Italy. The Broad Museum in Los Angeles, California has two rooms. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania has one. Phoenix, Arizona has one. The Perez Museum in Miami has one, and that's where I was able to experience this incredible feeling. Bentonville, Arkansas, Raleigh, North Carolina, the University of Rochester in New York, and there's an entire museum now dedicated to her in Tokyo. So, one more slide. I just wanted to say that these spectacular women are models for resilience and celebration. And seriously, to create is to persist, and to persist, we need to create. And each woman's birthday cake is not just a celebration of their lives, but of their ability to persist and overcome obstacles. And for me, they offer me clues and guides and inspiration for our own troubles. So thank you for joining this birthday celebration. And January, you got something? Anything?
Yeah, well, I have one question
Yes.
that wraps up the whole series. What? How did you select these five women for today's presentation?
Um, that's a very good question. I, I've been very intrigued with, my mother had my mother died a year ago, and I've got her date books, and I've been going through them and noting all the birthdays she's had in them and thinking, oh, long lost uncles and aunts. And I'm like, I should know more about their lives. But then tying in, I'm so frustrated. And I was an art history major, with how little I was taught in school about women. And I really think that they can speak to me, how I can, in a way that a man in his art career cannot. And so, and just this beginning of the year, I started every month just Googling female artists born this month, or dates. And they don't have a lot, you know what I mean? And so it was easy to narrow it down. I mean, obviously there are way more, but I did that. So that's kind of how, and so I've been trying on my Instagram, and on my website to sort of share a little snippet about a female artist who's had a birthday on this day or something like that. You said, though, you had seen Yayoi Kusuma's work at the Brooklyn Museum?
New York Botanical Garden a few years ago. So when you see her work in the museum setting, you don't really relate to
Yeah.
the nature as much as you can see her work in the nature. So that was an incredible show just to see the amount of work that she had created. But because her inspiration from the dots came from nature, seeing her work out there, some of them were indoors, but a lot of them were outdoors. And she also had wrapped tree trunks with fabric with dots. It was a spectacular. We had an amazing time. Even my little child had a great time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it was very exciting to see her work. And I didn't quite make the connection. Like when you read a statement, artist statement saying it, okay, that's inspired from the by the nature, but you can really feel it if you see it in nature, displayed in nature.
Wow. Wow. I'm sorry I missed that.
Yeah, so I was lucky to catch that show.
Yeah. And I think too, I didn't know that she lived in an institution to this day, you know? But that's kind of cool in a way. I mean, her meals are provided, I guess. It's like, she just make her work. And she's 96. I hope she can go on. I have I mean, I was amazed at the arc of her media too.
Mm-hmm.
Like what you can do in 96 years, and where, I mean, from where she's covering a horse with dots at the beginning in a photograph,
Yeah,
you're walking in.
performance. Yeah, with her.
Yeah, amazing. It's amazing. So I
Well, thank you so much for having me here. I did not know what I was doing today. I was
well, I
expecting
appreciate you
it
taking
today. I just learned as I went along.
Thank you.
But I learned a lot, and like what you mentioned earlier, I'm stunned by how little I know about these female artists.
Yes.
So now I'm inspired to go out and learn more and apply to my own practice.
So I have to just give a plug then. On the YouTube channel of Inspiration Art is also a series 10 videos called Who Is She? And
Mhm.
I made a little a zine that went with them, and they were, a way for, I did one a month last year, and it was a way for me to research and learn, and also share where you can find the work yourself. So each one of these artists, I think we all have an assignment now to go and look for their work and celebrate them and take the lessons that we need,
Absolutely.
as we go forward. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful lecture today.
Yes. Look forward to seeing your work around too, January, really. So thank you.
Thank you.